Okay, very good morning, and thank you very much for coming here. It's great to be here. I really want to start with basically December 3rd, 2016. And I'm sure it doesn't really mean much to most of you, but it's a day that I actually remember pretty clearly. It was a Saturday, and at the time I was visiting the US, trying to wrap up my PhD at the University of Cambridge. Started like pretty much any other Saturday. I got up late, because it's the weekend, and it's good academic etiquette to do that anyway. And what usually happens is that I wake up, I check my phone, go through some emails, read the news, and then usually go back to sleep, because just doing the snoozing thing for half an hour. But didn't really happen that Saturday, because basically, I did check the phone, so far so good, but what I saw was something like this here. So tons of emails, tons of Facebook messages, and I know that for some of you that might seem pretty normal, but for me at the time, I can promise you it wasn't. So my first thought was like, what the hell did I do last night? Like, what happened? Took me a few seconds to realize that obviously I didn't do anything because I was writing up the PhD and I was living this miserable, lonely life at the time. So luckily it wasn't the aftermath of a crazy night out, but it was actually this article here. That was published in the Swiss media outlet Das Magazin, and it's basically entitled, "I Only Show That the Bomb Exists." So if you're not a native German speaker, you probably haven't read this article, haven't come across it, but I'm pretty sure that you'll recognize the story behind it really quickly. Because it was the story of the scientist Michał Kosinski, who you see in this picture, and a company called Cambridge Analytica. Here we go, I can see people nodding in recognition. So for those of you who haven't heard about this, basically what the article suggested in a nutshell was that this company called Cambridge Analytica, who, just by the way, I'm not affiliated with, not at all, I've never worked for them, but they worked for the Trump presidential campaign, and what they did is they used like highly detailed psychological profiles of millions and millions of voters in the US to target them with personalized advertising. And the aim was really kind of to discourage people from voting for Hillary. Now, this guy here, Michał Kosinski, happened to be my PhD advisor, and the story of the article was basically my PhD topic. And it's not that I didn't know about the article, because I had actually spent quite a bit of time on the phone with one of the authors. So I knew it was coming out, I knew it was going to have my name in it, but I really had no idea that it would literally kind of blow up and become one of the most influential articles of the year. Because like just within a few months, there were like thousands and thousands of articles published on the story of Cambridge Analytica all around the world, mostly raising more questions than actually providing answers. So just to put the bad news first, I'm not going to tell you anything about Cambridge Analytica. I'm not going to tell you what they did. I don't speak about whether their campaigns were actually effective or not, whether they influenced the presidential campaign or not. And that's just because we don't know. So I guess some of the investigations underway might at some point reveal some of the truths. Even that is kind of questionable. But really, most of it is, at the moment, speculation. However, what I can do as kind of a scientist who was involved in the development of these technologies of psychological targeting, psychological profiling from the very start, is that I can talk to you about the science behind Cambridge Analytica. So basically, what is this? 3 questions that I want to address that I hope will give you like a better understanding of what's behind all this fuss. And that's, how does psychological targeting work? So how do we actually create profiles, psychological profiles of millions of people without having to ask them? Then is it really effective? So can we influence behavior by changing the way that we communicate with people? And then the third one is like, what are not only the challenges, but also maybe the opportunities that psychological targeting provides for individuals, for society? Okay, but first of all, I actually want to take like a step back and talk about what psychologists like me mean when they talk about personality. Interestingly, it actually like this idea that we don't only differ in terms of appearance, in how we look, but also in terms of our character, dates back to the times of Hippocrates and Greek philosophers. And what they believed is basically that people's temperament, or what we now call personality, was determined by like a very delicate balance in terms of body fluids. So choleric people, for example, were thought to have like an excess in bile. Theory has been debunked for centuries, but it really kind of kickstarted this idea that what we define by is not just our looks, but it's something that goes deeper, something that we now call psychology or personality. Now, if you fast forward to the present, the most, let's say, basic definition of personality that we have is to say that personality really captures the most fundamental differences in the way that we think, feel, and behave. So it's really not just like emotional states that you might experience throughout the day, which this image kind of suggests, but it's really like these stable, like relatively stable tendencies and preferences that make individuals uniquely themselves and also distinguish them from other people. And there's different frameworks that have been suggested over the years. The most popular one is the Big Five model. And you might have guessed that basically the Big Five model suggests that there's like 5 dimensions, so 5 personality traits that really capture those differences in affect, cognition, and behavior. So it's openness to experience, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. I'm just very briefly going to go through all of them because I'll talk about some of them later in some of the work that I did. So openness to experience basically distinguishes between people who are artistic, liberal, intellectually curious on the one hand, and people who are more traditional and conservative on the other. What I should say is that basically all of these dimensions are continuous, so it's not that you're either high on openness or low on openness. You can basically fall anywhere on the spectrum. Then conscientiousness is what they call the German trait, which is basically people who love to plan, who love to organize, would be characterized as reliable, which with the Volkswagen scandal has kind of become, has received like a little crack. And on the other hand, it's people who are more flexible, maybe stuff doesn't always start on time, who would be considered low in conscientiousness. Then extraversion is the trait that I think we used in our everyday language, is people who are kind of social, outgoing, they love to surround themselves with other people, and people who are introverted are more reserved and quiet. They just like to be with themselves some of the time. Then agreeableness is the interpersonal trait. So it's people who are caring, who are trusting, who really deeply care about their social relationships on the one hand, and people who are a bit more critical and competitive on the other. And then finally, neuroticism, which is also known inversely as emotional stability, really distinguishes between people who are stable, nothing can really stress them out on the one hand, and people who are a bit more in touch with their emotions on the other. So I think what's interesting is that we don't usually think about other people along those dimensions, but actually the Big Five model was developed based on the language that we use to describe people. So in, I think it was 1936, there were 2 psychologists who went through the entire English dictionary, and they came up with around 18,000 words that people use to describe personality or behavior, like in themselves and in other people. And what they did is they just used some statistical methods to see which words actually go together, and what's the minimum number of underlying psychological dimensions that we can use to capture most of this complexity. So this is really the background of the Big Five model, and it's the model that in research and psychology is most widely used and is also most kind of scientifically validated. Okay, so now that we have a common understanding of what personality means, the question is, how do we measure it? And there's different ways in which you can measure it. You can do interview studies, you can do association tests, but really the most common way of measuring personality is self-report questionnaires. So that basically means giving people a bunch of statements and asking them about their self-perception. So if you want to measure extraversion, for example, you can give people the statements, I talk to a lot of different people at parties, and then try to capture the degree to which people agree with that statement. So if you say, I strongly agree with that statement, you're more likely to be extroverted. If you say, I strongly disagree, you're more likely to fall on the lower end of the extroversion scale. And those questionnaires, they work relatively well in the context of research and academic work, but they're pretty useless when it comes to applied contexts, such as digital marketing or mass persuasion. And that's just because they're not scalable, as you can imagine. So one of these questionnaires takes about 5 minutes up to an hour to complete. So we can easily do that in the lab with, let's say, 200 participants. But if you want to do that with millions and millions of consumers online, it's just not feasible. You can't give them the questionnaire and then tell them, OK, if you just kind of fill out these questions for 30 minutes, then we're going to show you the best ad for you. It doesn't work. So basically what we need is we need to find a way that we can gauge people's personality without having to ask them. And the way that we do that is basically we can look at their digital footprints. And what I mean by that is all the traces that we leave in the digital world as we go about our everyday lives. So that could be the stuff that you share and post on Facebook or like on Facebook, like the cookies that keep track of the websites that you visit, like the songs that you listen to on YouTube, the stuff that you buy with your credit card, the sensor data that's captured by your smartphone, and so on and so on. The list is pretty much endless. And as you can imagine, like all these traces together really tell us a lot about people's habits and preferences. So we no longer have to ask people about whether they like to socialize. We can just look at their social network activity. Or we don't have to ask them anymore whether they like to visit new places, because we can look at their Instagram check-ins or like their GPS location on the smartphone. And like this movement from, say, like assessing personality not by questionnaires, but actually automatically assessing it via digital footprints is really kind of powered by machine learning, by algorithms that translate these like vast amounts of data into meaningful psychological profiles. And I don't want to go into detail at all. If you want, you can find me later, and I'm happy to explain it. But basically, what I want to do instead is give you like some examples, like some fairly simple and intuitive examples of how online behavior relates to something like psychological traits. Because you will see it is like oftentimes very intuitive, and it kind of defeats this notion that AI is just this black box where we have no idea what's happening. And it also shows that basically, even though we're using new methods, the underlying mechanisms are still grounded in psychological theory. So just to start with some example, so those are the words that are most strongly correlated in the Facebook status updates of extroverted users. So basically, it doesn't mean that extroverts talk about these things all the time, so it's not absolute frequencies. It just means that if you're using one of these words, you're more likely to be extroverted than other people. So if you see extroverts talk about parties, excited, girls, can't wait, hit me up, so they seem to be having a pretty good time. If you contrast that to the words that are most predictive of introversion, you'll see that it's a very different picture. So I'm not saying that introverts are not having a good time, because I think I'm much more in this word cloud here. But like introverts are just talking about stuff that you usually do by yourself. So reading, kind of writing, internet, anime, manga. And it's, again, like you don't need rocket science, you don't need any kind of complicated algorithms to figure this out. This is really just counting words. Now, probably one of my favorite ones is, this is the Trade of Agreeableness, which, if we think back, is like the interpersonal trade. And you can see people who are like very caring and trusting. They talk about wonderful, Merry Christmas, blessed, Thanksgiving, thank you. So they seem to be very grateful. Just a word of warning, the word cloud for the more critical and competitive people looks very different. And we're not cherry picking, so this is really just what the data tells us. And again, this is like, it's not that critical people swear all the time. It's just if you do swear on Facebook, it's a sign that you're probably not super agreeableness and caring. Now, we can do the same thing for Facebook likes. So basically, those are the likes that are most strongly correlated with introversion, extroversion. And again, you see similar patterns. So extroverted people do the stuff that they usually do in the offline world. They kind of love socializing, parties, meeting new people. And introverts kind of are more interested in the computer side. What I should say is that basically when I say Facebook like, I just refer to the liking an official Facebook page. So CNN might have like an official Facebook page. It's not liking one of the cat videos that your friends post. So it's really just liking these official Facebook pages. The same is true for the trait of neuroticism, where you can see that like people who are neurotic, which again, if you think back, is like the emotionally unstable people, you can see how that is reflected in their likes. Because they like some stuff like, sometimes I hate myself, but then also I'm so happy. So you can just see like the fluctuations. And I guess people on the stable side, they like parkour, skydiving, and climbing, which probably means that you have to be relatively stable in order to enjoy those things. If you're extremely neurotic, jumping out of an airplane is just not that much fun. Okay, so now the question is, and I think that's one of the most important questions, how accurate is it? Like, how accurately can a computer predict someone's personality? And the thing is, like, if you measure height, you have a yardstick, and we have agreed on the unit of measurement. We know what we're measuring because there's a ground truth. So you can be fairly confident that what you're measuring is accurate. With personality, it's much more difficult, because even if we can agree on the unit of measurement, for example, the Big Five model, there's personality is inherently subjective. So there's nothing like the true extraversion level, there's nothing like the true openness score of a person, which really makes validating those psychometric scales a little harder. So the most common way of actually doing it in the context of machine prediction is that we compare the computer prediction to the self-perception of the person. So how good is the computer at predicting how you see yourself? And I could throw numbers at you now for how accurate it is, but it probably wouldn't mean much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to steal the brilliant idea of one of my coworkers at Cambridge, who basically came up with a comparison baseline that puts it in context. And that's the accuracy of people in our environment. So in addition to just running those computer-based predictions, we also asked, let's say, your work colleagues, your friends, your family members, your spouses, to fill in one of these questionnaires, not for themselves, but actually for you. And what we can do now is see how accurate are people who should know you fairly well in predicting your personality in comparison to how accurate the computer is. What I'm going to show you is just the numbers for likes. So those are just purely like-based predictions. You just have to trust me that the ones for status updates and tweets look pretty similar. So what the computer needs about 10 likes per person to be as accurate as a work colleague. They need about 65 likes to be as accurate or more accurate than a friend. Around 120 likes to be more accurate than a family member, which includes your siblings, your parents, like the kids if you have any. And around 300 likes to be better than someone's spouse, so your husband and wife or partner. And at the time that the study was conducted, the average number of likes was 230, which really means that the computer, just by looking at your likes, outperformed your colleagues, your friends, and your family. The only kind of person that was probably a little bit better, not much, was your spouse. And if we assume that actually the number of likes goes up, the computer is probably now as good as your spouse, which is really sad news for our interpersonal relationships. But also means that the computer is actually really accurate at kind of inferring your personality just by looking at your online preferences. Okay, so now what does that mean for targeting? Targeting people, psychological targeting. What's pretty clear is that if we have access to the profile of a person, let's say their Facebook likes, their credit spending, whatever it is, we can actually make fairly accurate predictions about the psychological profile of that person. And there's more and more companies actually, like third-party companies offering that service, so you can now kind of go to IBM StatSocial and ask for the profiles for your customers. However, what I want to actually talk about over the next few minutes is some of the work that I've been doing where we basically say, okay, like some companies, they don't have access to either the data or the algorithms. So is there a way that we can leverage the power of psychological targeting without having to use algorithms and without having to collect individual level data? So what I'm going to show you is that basically all it takes is one Facebook like to do that. And if we think back to the kind of list of likes that I showed you who are kind of predictive of extraversion and predictive of introversion, we know that we can basically just single out individual footprints that we know are correlated with people being extroverted, people being introverted. And now what Facebook allows you to do, and this is a screenshot from their actual advertising, like targeting platform, is they not only allow you to target people based on demographics, like age, gender, like the regular stuff, but they also allow you to target people based on behavior and interests. So what you can do now is you can take the likes that you know are highly correlated with being extroverted and populate that section with those likes. It's kind of similar to like when you're a travel agency, for example, you would use likes or behaviors, interests that are related to traveling. It's just that we're not looking at single behaviors, we're looking at people's personality and psychological profile. So again, if you say, I want to target extroverts now, you pick a bunch of likes that are strongly associated with extroversion, and you put them in the section. What's interesting is that Facebook only allows you to connect them with or statements, so you're reaching out to people who like socializing or Swayze or Entourage, which really means that what we're using on the individual level is just one like to determine whether a group of people is more introverted or extroverted than the average person. Okay, so now the really big question is it actually effective? So does it affect behavior? does it mean that if we use those insights into people's psychology, that we can actually influence the number of times that people click, the number of times that people purchase? And the way that I like to think about it is basically in terms of matching. So can we match the content that we're showing to people to their psychological profile in a way that increases the likelihood that they're going to engage with that content? And I'm going to show you the results of some of the studies I've done over the past few years, where basically we're looking at 2 different mechanisms to do that. And they'll become clear in just a second. Okay, so the first one is what I call product matching. Which means that we're really kind of taking products that have like inherent personality characteristics and we're matching them to the psychology of our audience. So in this case, we just used 2 apps that were available on the Google Play Store. One was like a proxy for an extroverted product, like this party starter game that you play with friends. It's supposed to be exciting and fun. And you have like the introverted proxy, which is like this classic brick breaker game that you basically play by yourself and is much more introverted in that sense. What we did is we then advertised, like in real Facebook campaigns, both of the products to extroverted audiences and to introverted audiences. And the assumption was really that if there's a match, so extroverts receiving the extroverted product, introverts receiving the introverted product, that they would click and install the app more often. Just to give you an idea of the scope of these campaigns that were live for, I think, about a week. And we had more than, like the ad was shown about 400,000 times. And we had about 4,000 clicks, so people clicking on our ad, and about 300 installs. Now, the metric of success that I'm going to show you and that I think is the most relevant for companies is actually the conversion rate, which means like how often did people install or take action, like install the app, take action after having clicked on the ad. And what we see is if you average it across the conditions, the matching ads were 8 times more successful than the mismatching ads. Which is, like, if you think about it, it's a huge effect. It means that people are 8 times more likely to install the app or purchase your product than when there's a mismatch. Now, I think this mechanism is really interesting because some people are like, when I show these results, is like, oh, but I don't want to be manipulated. I want to make my own decisions in terms of what I want to buy. Now, I just want to kind of show you a few numbers that kind of question this perspective. So today, there's around 500 million products on Amazon. There's 30 trillion pages indexed on Google. And there's around 820 million hours of video content on YouTube. And I just calculated that. If the average person lives to 80 years and watches YouTube nonstop, that would be 1,000 lifetimes. So really, there's absolutely no way that you can watch all of this content ever. So really what we need is some kind of mechanisms to filter content and help people find what they're looking for. And it's actually backed up by research on the paradox of choice, which shows that if there's too much choice, people don't make decisions at all first, and if they do, they're less satisfied. And like my classic example is Netflix, which I encounter a lot. It's basically, I go on Netflix, there's so many options, it takes me 10 minutes. Either I pick a movie, that's already great, because sometimes I also just give up because I can't make up my mind. And even if I pick a movie, like, there's always something at the back of my mind that tells me, maybe if you had spent like 5 more minutes, maybe you would have found an even better movie. So really, there is this need to filter through the content that we have and help people find the stuff that they're interested in. And one of the reasons why we might want to do that on the basis of psychology is actually that, like in my own work, what I show is that people whose purchases better match their personality are actually happier. So it's not just that we're helping them find stuff that might be interesting to them, but we're giving them the chance to express themselves and express the way that they see themselves, not only to basically themselves, but also to other people. So this really seems to be benefit in terms of helping people find the stuff that they're interested in, and it also helps them to kind of express their identity. Now, like the product matching, or what I call product matching mechanism, I think is interesting. It doesn't always apply. So in this case, it was great because we had products that were very distinct in terms of their personality, but you can imagine there's like tons of products that are relatively neutral and could potentially appeal to pretty much anyone. Mobile phones, mobile plans, for example. So the second mechanism that I'm interested in is basically message matching. So that means we're taking one product. In this study, we teamed up with like this beauty retailer in the UK, and we advertised their online website. And the only thing that we're doing is we're changing the way that we're communicating to people. So the only thing that we're changing is not the product, but it's the message. So in this case, we asked professional graphic designers and copywriters to come up with like 5 extroverted ads, 5 introverted ads. And you can immediately see the difference, right? So the images for the extroverted people would always be something going on, like people were socializing, it was like exciting. Copy would say something like dance like no one's watching, but they totally are. So playing with the need of extroverts to be the center of attention. And then the introverted ones would be much more reserved, much more quiet, one person in like a setting where it was basically just themselves. Copy would say something like, beauty doesn't have to shout. So again, I think there's like very kind of intuitive that those ones might appeal differently to different types of personality if you think of the extroversion spectrum. Now we did the same thing. Again, we advertised both ad versions to both extroverts and introverts. It was a much larger campaign. Ad was shown about 3 million times. We had about 10,000 clicks and around 500 purchases. So again, if we look at the metrics of success, which is the number of purchases, the matching ads were about 1.5 times more effective than the mismatching ones. And now you can already see that like it's not 8 times, the effect is much smaller, but if you think about it, like it's also like a much more simple concept. So we're not matching products. The product is exactly the same, and the only thing that we're changing is the way we promote it, which changes people's subjective perception of what the product is like. Okay, and I want to show you, because I think this is where we're heading to, and oftentimes I get asked, well, great, so now I get these psychological profiles, and like, but how do I actually come up with the creatives? And there's this company like a startup in the UK that I'm working with. I don't make any money, so no conflict of interest here. But it's basically what they're developing is like an automated way of creating content that's tailored to specific personality profiles. So what they do is they basically have this platform where you can come up with creative. You can say, I want to target extroverts. They give you a description. They give you advice of what to do in your campaign, so how to best talk to extroverts. I think one of the really cool features is that they suggest images. So they have run some AI algorithms that can already predict which images are most appealing to which types of personalities. So again, if you're thinking about extroversion, one of the defining features is actually having people in the picture, which makes a lot of sense because, again, it has like the social element. And then they also offer you to basically put in your copy in real time, and they suggest ways to optimize it for extroversion. So again, it's not that they're coming up with a copy for you, they're just helping you to improve it and make it more specific to extroverts in the way that extroverts would actually talk. Okay, now the question that I think is particularly interesting in the context of like the political campaign sphere is how powerful is it? Like, can we really influence someone's behavior in the way that they're going to change dramatically what they were going to do? So can we, for example, turn a convinced Hillary voter into a Trump supporter? No. The answer is just no. But it doesn't mean that it's not effective, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't care about it and have like this published discussion around whether or not we want to use psychological targeting. Because oftentimes it really just needs like this small push like for an undecided person to change their mind, or really kind of just trying to convince them to change their opinion on like a specific topic, gun control, climate change. So oftentimes we don't need these dramatic changes where we take someone who is in one corner, push them to the other corner, because most people are actually somewhere in the middle. Okay, so this was, I think it kind of got lost, but this was actually the title of my talk. And I think it's a really important question to ask. So is psychological targeting, should we think of it as a weapon of mass destruction? Or could it actually be like a catalyst for social good? Now, if you just follow the media, they certainly side with the former proposition. So they're suggesting that psychological targeting is like this tool to manipulate people and get them to do stuff that they don't really want to do. Some have actually have suggested that psychological targeting poses a threat to democracy. And if we look at the context of Cambridge Analytica, or the case of Cambridge Analytica, I fully agree. But that's not because psychological targeting or the technology of psychological targeting is evil per se, but it was used in a way that tried to discourage people from putting in their vote. So obviously, if you're going to do that, this idea is undermining like the concept of democracy where we all contribute. But I just want to kind of take a second or like a minute to think of a different scenario in which actually not Trump, but Hillary had used psychological targeting. And not to discourage people from voting, but actually trying to reach out to her kind of voters on a personal basis. So trying to really understand what they care about and trying to communicate with them in a way that speaks their language, in a way that they can really understand what's happening, in a way that makes them want to engage in the political process. And my intuition is that she would have been celebrated, just like Obama was celebrated for his use, like his clever use of data in 2008. So, yes, psychological targeting can be a threat to democracy, but I truly believe that it can also provide a solution to what I think is probably an even bigger threat to our democratic system. And that's the fact that people are just disengaged right now. So if 40% of people in the US don't go out on election day and put in their vote, that just defeats the very idea of democracy, which is that we're all contributing. And it's actually something that oftentimes politicians, with Hillary actually being at the forefront, are accused of, that they don't care enough about their constituents, that they don't really speak their language. So I really believe that if we take this technology of psychological targeting and use it to understand what people truly care about, it actually kind of provides an opportunity for democracy as much as it probably poses a threat in the wrong hands. Now, I know that this is a very personal opinion, and we might collectively decide as a society that we don't want psychological targeting anywhere near our democracy. That's fine with me. I just want to show you some other examples where I think kind of psychological targeting can really act as a catalyst for social good. So one of the things that we actually talked about in the panel yesterday is the fact that people are often not very good at making decisions that benefit them in the long run. So everybody who's tried to diet at some point knows that. We kind of think next time we're really going to eat this apple because it's healthy, and then if we were to face the decision between like the brownie and the apple, we're definitely going for the brownie because it's just so much tastier right now. So like taking the concept of psychological targeting, I think we can really help people make better decisions and kind of follow through with their intentions. And there's different examples you can think about, like caring for the planet, kind of exercising more. One of the projects that I'm currently working on is related to savings. So like the idea being that can we help people save more money by highlighting different saving goals that are kind of matched to their personality. So we might not all want to save towards the same goals. I don't know, extroverts might want to save or might be more motivated to save towards like this exciting holiday with their friends that's coming up in the future, whereas introverts might actually be more motivated to save for something that kind of makes their home more comfortable. So again, like understanding that the psychological drivers of people can actually help us make better decisions and really do the stuff that benefits them in the long run. But I think it doesn't just kind of stop there. There's probably like an almost unlimited pool of potential applications. We can help people find careers that are more satisfying without them having to reach us out to us first. We can personalize education, so we can try to really understand how each and every kid learns best, and then tailor the approach that we teach them to match those, let's say, cognitive styles, again, personality. And I think one of the also very interesting examples that we're currently working on is trying to detect early signs of depression using smartphones. So again, like depressed people are probably not the ones who are going to reach out actively because they're in a state where they don't feel comfortable. And if we can detect it, and if we can send them like in the right moment with the right message, some kind of suggestions for where they can find help, this might actually have a huge positive impact. Okay, now I think most importantly, in my perspective, this is only the beginning. So first of all, it's not just personality, it's not just Facebook. Pretty much everything that we've tried to predict in terms of your psychological, socio-demographic profile, including income, political ideology, heart disease, sexual orientation, can be predicted from different footprints. So that includes, again, Facebook, like your Twitter. We're now at the stage where we can look at faces. We can predict to some degree of accuracy your personality just by looking at your face, which means that we don't even have to collect data anymore. You can walk around, we have CCTV, and we can make those predictions automatically. So I think this is really just the beginning. If you look at, I think those pictures are really telling. Election of the Pope in 2005, election of the Pope in 2013, which really shows that large parts of our lives are now mediated through these digital devices. There's like a fun fact that I just recently came across is that the distance that people scroll on their smartphones every day is around 300 feet, which is the height of the Statue of Liberty. So people spend an insane amount of their time like using those devices, and they just carry it around all the time, which really means that we can now not only look at people's stable psychological traits, but actually put people in context. So we can now figure out that, oh, it's not just an extroverted person, it's an extroverted person who's currently in a good mood, who's surrounded by friends, because we can tap into their microphone. And so this might be the ideal time to actually push out the messages that we want to send. And I think even that pales in comparison to what I think the future is going to hold. Like if we think about all the ways that we're probably going to enhance our human capabilities. So this is just an example where we might actually put in contact lenses that not just capture our environment, but actually give us information in real time. We might swallow or kind of implant chips that measure our kind of our physiology all the time. At some point, we might even have chips in our brain that we connect to a supercomputer and which can really tell what we're thinking, what we're planning to do in real time. Now, as a researcher, I think this is incredibly exciting. As a person, I also think it's incredibly scary. And this is really the reason why I want to end on this quote, which obviously we know is not coming from Voltaire, but it's coming from Peter Parker's Uncle Ben Parker in Spider-Man, totally misattributed to Voltaire, is that with great power comes great responsibility. So I really believe that we'll be able to understand the human psychology much better than ever before, and at a scale that we've never seen before. And so it's interesting, because like when we researchers do our studies, we always have to work with consent. So basically, we have to tell participants what kind of data we're going to collect and what is going to happen with that data. And I think this is the common practice, or that's the gold standard that we need in industry as well. People have a right to know what kind of data is being used and what the data is being used for. And I truly believe that that's not just good for the user, so for all of us, because all of us are kind of consumers and use it, but that it's also good for businesses. Because if you have a product that's so good, like if you can use people's data to kind of improve your product and turn it into a service that's so good that people happily share their data, that's a competitive advantage that will kind of propel you to the top of the pyramid. And if that's true, you want to talk about it. So I think all of this needs kind of like rethinking of data collection, of data ownership, of kind of consumer empowerment. But I really think that all of the people in this room have the power to drive that change. And I really hope that together with scientists, with industry, we're actually going to turn psychological targeting into like a catalyst for social good. Thank you.